In 3, 2, 1. What's going on, folks? Welcome to 34 Questions. I'm your host, 34, and tonight I have a very special guest. Michael Callahan is in the building. How are you doing tonight, Michael?
I'm doing pretty great, 34. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. Actually, more than all right. It's just that I feel like sometimes my day job takes a lot of energy out of me, but I always feel like it's a good way to just give back to the universe. I work with students during the day. I work at a high school running their after school program. So I spend all my day pretty much hanging with teenagers and, trying to get them to where they want to be or where they see themselves. But yeah, doing great. It's a Wednesday, so we're halfway there. How about yourself? Your Wednesday been going well so far?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's good to be halfway through the week. I was just listening to your episode with Miss Carrie. Are you still tired in a good way from all your teaching assistant job?
Oh, yeah. Shout out to Miss Carrie. I met Miss Carrie at a previous job, and that one I think was a little more, that did take a lot of energy out of me, but in a different way. At that time, as a teaching assistant, I was working one-on-one with students for pretty much 4 to 5 hours a day. And at this job, it's more like multiple students at different times and a lot shorter. I wouldn't say 4 or 5 hours, more like 2 to 3 hours, depending on how much the kids want to stick around after school. But yeah, it's similar but different. But either way, it was very fulfilling for me. And I think that's all we're looking for in life, right? Something to fulfill our souls and our spirits. And I'm just thankful that after, I don't know if you heard my other episodes, but after 17, 18 jobs, I think I finally found my thing to push through and kind of do for the rest of my life. So thank you for asking. I appreciate that.
Of course, man. If I may ask another question.
Oh, absolutely.
What makes this thing your thing? After 17, 18 jobs, what is it about what you're doing now that truly fulfills you that the other jobs didn't?
For sure. I think at the time too, I wasn't sure, or I didn't recognize what it was, because the job I'm at right now and the one I speak so highly of, I was here 4 years ago, and I ended up leaving to chase more money and maybe try to climb the social status ladder and show people that I'm keeping up with everybody else in my age range, and I think that was a common thing for a lot of us out there who are still trying to find out what career we want or what decisions to make as far as our day job. But it makes me feel like I really try to give my all to everyone else. Like I realize I'm a people pleaser, and at this point in my life, I feel like I just want to own it and be like, all right, I'm gonna be that dude. I'm gonna be that dude that just I don't see it as people pleasing, but I want to be that dude that exudes some energy that, if you interact with me, I hope that you can feel that I'm just doing the best I can to make sure this interaction that we have is like a memorable experience, or an experience that makes you feel better at leaving from. So I like working with people, and I've worked with a lot of adults, and I'm not saying that's a terrible thing to work with adults, but there is a different kind of barrier or wall when it comes to working with older folks. So working with kids, though, the wall's still there, but for some reason I feel this purity in their energy, like they haven't been jaded just yet with life and the things that go on. Even though I know there's some that are going through some difficult things, they still have that childlike energy, and I know I still got that as well. Like I feel like I'm a big kid. So it vibes really well with who I am. I know it's not for everybody. Not everybody likes working with kids. But for me, where I'm at in my life and the experiences I've had, it makes me feel like it fits. And just seeing kids grow. I don't have kids myself. I think that's also another part of it, that I can help other kids grow and see their growth in the work that I do. So that for me is like very like fulfilling. So yeah, as long as I don't feel like I'm being selfish, which I am, I still am. I'm not perfect, but I want to be able to find ways to not be as selfish as I am when I'm here at home by myself, taking the time for myself. So yeah, I try to put myself in situations like working at the school and doing this podcast to interact with folks and, just continue to put out that energy, touch as many lives as I can. So I think that's what it is, man.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I worked with fifth grade elementary school students for about 6 years in a volunteer capacity with this organization in LA that basically would, I'm trying to think of a Cliff's Notes version of it, basically pairs 10 mentors from the film industry or the creative industry with 10 fifth graders. There's also middle school and high school versions of this as well, but I preferred working with elementary school students because one, when you're working with middle school students and all the puberty is hitting them, they're not always the most pleasant to be around. I'm sure I was a pain in the neck when I was 13, 14 years old. God bless anyone who works with kids of that age. They are going through a lot. But for me, like the real sweet spot was like 11, 12 years old. Because like you said, they had that wonder, they had that boundless imagination, that childlike awe. And over the course of 8 weeks, there would be 10 mentors paired with 10 students at like these either schools that like had underfunded arts programs or like at-risk children. And we'd pair 10 mentors with 10 kids, and then they'd have a head mentor, and that was my role, who would guide the group 1 hour a week. The first 30 minutes we'd play different kinds of games that were all related to the structure of storytelling. And then in the back half, the last 30 minutes, the kids would be paired off with their individual mentors, and those mentors would guide those kids over the course of 8 weeks through writing their first 5-page screenplays. And then in the last week, we would have a special event in the school auditorium where all 10 kids would get to audition professional actors that we would bring in. And then they would get to hand out their scripts to those actors, and those actors would perform their 5-page scripts live in their school auditorium for their friends, their family, their teachers, their classmates. And it was a really transformative experience, not only for these kids who, for many of them, this was the first time they would ever get to be creative outside of the bounds of homework. We didn't put any limitations on the stories that the kids had to tell, aside from no violence and no curse words. But beyond that, they could tell any story they wanted to. And I could see the transformative power of giving kids that agency to write whatever they wanted to, and to see that validation from adults who, importantly, weren't their parents and weren't their teachers. It was just adults who they didn't know, who were putting in time to help enable these kids to pursue their dreams and their visions. And it was one of the most rewarding moments of my life because I got to learn, it sounds cheesy, but I got to learn so much from those kids. And also, it was a blessing to be able to put myself in that space to see stories from the child's perspective. Because I really do a kind of storytelling for a living. I work in advertising, and you can get really jaded pretty quickly. So to be transported back and see those stories and see kids fall in love with storytelling the same way that I did when I was their age, it was like watering the plant of my soul. And so I really do miss that. But I totally get what you're saying. And I do want to circle back to something you said earlier. I don't want to negate how you describe yourself, but I do think that how you're describing at 34 doesn't make it sound like you're a people pleaser. It makes it sound like when you interact with people, you leave them with a pleasant feeling. And I do think that is a distinct difference. I think leaving people feeling better than you found them is a really great trait, but I associate people pleasing with kind of bending over backwards, doing anything asked of you, almost sycophantically, just like doing anything possible. And that I think can be really toxic. But seeking to leave people feeling pleasant, seeking to leave them feeling better than you found them, I think is a really positive trait. And I think it's something that you're modeling with this podcast.
I appreciate that, Mike. And as far as people pleasing goes, I do want to address that one. I still am that person that you described as far as people pleasing goes. If you ask my coworkers, they know I'm the kind of guy who almost says yes to almost everything. I'm willing to put almost everything on my plate. Because the thing about it, Mike, for me is that, I want people to be driven to do what they feel like they're passionate about. And sometimes there's tasks that people aren't passionate about. And this is how I kind of been my whole life, but I'll pick up those tasks that people don't want to do. And, if it's for the betterment if it's for the greater good, I'll take that responsibility on. And at some point, I'm sure, the quality of work isn't going to be there, or maybe I'll get burnt out. But I do want to show people that I'm willing, and that like I hope other people can see that, okay, this guy's really putting a lot on himself. Maybe I should help him out, or maybe I should do something to contribute to the fight of the greater good. And I recently got into a managerial role, supervisory role, and that's something my bosses always are actually working with me on it, is to delegate and to ask people to you need to do this, you need to do that, which is a very uncomfortable space for me at the moment. But I'm looking forward to growing into it. But as a supervisor, my whole goal is to find what's the passion of the workers underneath me, so I can get them into situations and places where they feel driven themselves. And that for me would be a success as a leader, is to be able to put them in a place where they intrinsically are putting their best foot forward, or doing the most, or going the extra mile because they really care about what they're doing. Which is, after 18 jobs, man, I've seen a lot of folks are not in that kind of situation. So I guess for me, that's kind of how I try to, lead by example, is by taking all these things on. I'm trying to be careful. So I appreciate you looking out for me, but.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And I would say, I think that leading by example, and again, I know this is all unsolicited, so I appreciate you listening to my unsolicited advice, but I would just say leading by example is an amazing quality. And I think that it speaks highly of you that you seek to do that. My only pushback would be, I used to work on film sets. I come from a film background initially. It's why I moved to Los Angeles. And I used to be an assistant director. So basically what an assistant director does, it's not a creative position. So to describe it in better detail, let's say you were the director on a film set and I was your assistant director, 34. And so as the director, you'd be focusing on all the creative stuff. So you'd be off working with the actors, walking them through their lines. You'd be working with the costume designer, the cinematographer, the production designer, making your vision come to life on set, right? So while you're focusing on all the creative stuff, I, as your assistant director, am making sure that everything is on time, the schedule is orderly, that we're making all the shots needed in a 12-hour day, right? So if you've got 30 shots you absolutely need while we're on this location for a single day, I'm the guy who makes it happen. So I'd be running around the set, all right, we're going to bring the horses in 2 hours, get those kids into studio teachers. We need them on the books, and then get the lead actress into makeup, get the actor to set. I'm basically running the set so that everything is on time when it needs to be, so you can focus on creative. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all of that is because I too, initially, right out of film school, had a big problem with delegation. Because for me, in the same way, kind of just in my life, it feels weird to ask someone else to do something that I know that I'm perfectly capable of doing. Now, the reason that I bring that up is that when you're in a managerial or leadership position, and this was something that was passed along to me by a director I was working for at the time. So I was pretty fresh out of film school. I was working on a commercial set, and it was right at the start of the day. And at the start of the day, right when you get on film set, the production assistants, they're basically like and I mean this strictly in terms of just in terms of hierarchy, the production assistants are at the very low end of the production, right? So they're vitally important, but in terms of seniority, they're at the bottom. To put it into context, my very first roles on film sets for the first couple of years was production assistant. Basically, you need something set up really quickly, you need tables moved, you need chairs moved, you need someone to drive to go get a Starbucks for the director, or you need them to run to Costco to get such and such. Like they run the errands for you. They're gophers, basically. They do exactly what they're told. And I saw the production assistants setting up the tables that like the breakfast and food would go on, which is the thing that you do right at the beginning of the day. And I saw, because it was a smaller shoot, I saw they were kind of struggling with it, right? So I ran over to start helping them, because for me, I'm an able-bodied guy. I'm grateful for that. And so I started to help them. And a few minutes in, I heard the director like shouting my name. He sounded a little bit upset. And he calls me over, and on film sets and in my work, I go by my last name, Callahan, because there's way too many Michaels in the world. He was like, "Callahan, get over here." And I was like, "All right." And he's like, "I need to talk to you." And he pulled me aside. Thankfully, he did this in private. And he was like, "I never want to see you doing that again." And I was like, "Why?" And he was like, "You're my assistant director. I don't want to turn my back. And when I turn back around, you're not there, because you are vitally important to me. And for us to make this day and for us to run this set, you have to be here. He's like, I know that you wanted to help them because they were struggling. But the thing is that you doing your role, the role that is assigned to you, the role that I'm paying you for, is the most important thing that you can do. And every time you're not doing the thing that you need to do, our set suffers. And once he put that in perspective for me, that, oh, by just me focusing on my one exclusive job, it actually makes everything else in the film set work better. Because if I'm spending time doing something that I'm not assigned to do, something's going to fall through the cracks. And so that's all I would say, is that don't let your clear, benevolent passion for helping other people and a reticence to delegate, which I completely understand, keep you from doing what you're meant to do, whether that's with work or with life. It's a total struggle, and I totally get it, but just be wary of the things that you might be distracted from doing that are actually important if you overload yourself.
I got you, man. I think my boss would definitely, thank you for continuing to spread that message to me, man. You're right, and that's where I feel like, I'm kind of feeling that that right now, that concern of the quality of my role at the moment. I'm trying to do so much, and I've been able to so far, but I am very aware of trying to make sure, like, things aren't what my boss would consider my priorities to not be dropped, and then after that I try to do all the extra things afterwards. And for my team, I feel like we're trying to get more folks back into working with kids and students. It's been pretty hard after Corona, to be honest. A lot of people are kind of that fear of, oh, I'm in a school, there's kids who don't really pay attention to hygiene and health and stuff, and being in a situation like that can turn people away from that kind of work, and that's where we are. So in my mind, as I'm doing my job, and I'm looking for my own assistant in this leadership position. So right now I'm kind of doing as both jobs, and yeah, I'm hoping I can find somebody just as passionate to come in, so I could feel comfortable, which kind of sucks now that I kind of say it out loud. Like I want to, because I want to believe in the team that I have, the team that's with me right now. And I know they're capable of more. It's just one thing that we always kind of bring up is our capacity, our capacity within our work, capacity outside of work. And I feel like everyone on the team has stuff that, they're going through, or they have things at home that, maybe affects how much energy they have at work. So I think it's unfair for me to expect them to bring, my level of passion when our circumstances are different or our experiences have been different. So it's very, for me, I'm trying to navigate that, I'm trying to show them that I'm trying to be understanding. But I also know that, there is more work that could be done. And I hope that you have that energy to do it, instead of me just saying, this is what needs to be done. And then, they're like, oh, like, I don't have the time or the energy to do what you're asking me to do. And I'm like, well, this is the job that you signed up for. I don't want to come with that energy. So yeah, that's the thing I'm trying to figure out, in my position at the moment, I would say.
I get that, man. I think a lot of it is about framing. I think, because I even when I'm in leadership positions today, I don't like being the bad guy or making it seem like I'm forcing people to do stuff. But I also recognize the tension that you're addressing, which is that, well, I need people to do the stuff that they signed up for when they took the job, right? And so how do you broach that? And I found that it really is a lot about language and framing. And when you call someone in, like in a good way, and be like, hey, like, we're all in this together, we're a team, and I need you, like if you frame it in such a way where it's like, you are vitally important to me, you're vitally important to this team, and I need you to do X, Y, Z, because, and it's oftentimes a really good reason to be vulnerable, right? Like if I'm overwhelmed at work, And I appeal to their goodness, and I appeal to the fact that like, hopefully they care about me in the same way that I care about them as a colleague. And I'm like, I'm drowning, like I'm feeling overwhelmed. It would be so amazing, if you could help me out and do X, Y, Z, right? And so instead of framing it as you're not doing well, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I'm using a hypothetical example. Instead of saying, oh, you're not doing X, Y, Z, you're supposed to be doing X, Y, Z. If people see, and I'm sure they do, how hard you're working, and then you frame it in such a way where it's like, I could really use your help because I know what a great XYZ person you are. I know how great you are at this. And if you do this, it'll really help me because I know how much I'm focusing on these kids. And if I could just have another half hour to focus on this one thing, that would be such a huge help to me, right? Yeah. I think it's about just wording it in such a way that doesn't trigger the reaction that I think you're afraid of getting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And honestly, what I've been thinking about is, off the top of my mind, I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. So I'm thinking about writing my coworkers a letter, just letting them know how much I appreciate and all the value I see in them, and just the stuff that I can see be utilized in the work that we do, that I know that they have in them, and I think they can see it for themselves too. It's just that, like I said, capacity is, I don't want to go into each coworker and tell their story pretty much, but
no, I get it. It's 34 questions, not 34 coworkers. I understand.
But no, I do want to write a letter to them to let them know all the things, like how great I see them being, but also letting them know that I don't want to be like, I basically want to explain everything I'm feeling, but in a letter instead of talking to them face to face, just because a lot of the times I'll miss something or I'll skip ahead because I get nervous, so I hope maybe a letter and then having a one-on-one meeting with each person, and then kind of reflecting on that so they can tell me how they felt about the things I said, and then moving forward from there. Like, I don't know, this is new to me. I haven't had a boss who kind of approached it this way, but I think it's just something that feels right for me, and for me to also get all my thoughts and all my comments out in one time, instead of having to say a little bit here and then wait and another week say a little more, and my boss tells me she tells me to slow down, and like I'm trying to rush this change and shift or thing that I'm trying to do at work, building culture, pretty much. Like, you can't rush building culture, and I understand that, but it's maybe something I need to learn for myself, because I just can't help I can't help it, man. It almost feels like I'm running out of time sometimes, and yeah, I think that feeling makes me feel like I need to push hard and like go put my foot on gas pedal, and no matter what my boss tells me, as far as like, you need to slow down, you need to stop saying yes to everything, it's like I gotta show that it can be done, and like it's not gonna break me. Which that sounds toxic as I say it, but it's I guess a lesson I have to learn the hard way at this point. But yeah,
I get you, man, and I think you're gonna do great. I mean, I think you give off an energy that is clear in your podcast, and even in this conversation, that is going to come through in the letters you write. I mean, you've got to let go of ego side behind you. I think people are going to feel that, and I think hopefully they'll come back with the same energy you're going to put in that letter. I think you got it.
I appreciate it, Mike, man. And now this was basically, you helped me vent a little bit about work, and I appreciate you giving me that space. But I do, want to ask you some questions as well. So let's move on, if you don't mind, to the warm-up. So
let's do it.
Here's my graphic for the warm-up. Anyways, my first question for you in the warm-up is, what would you like the audience to know about you?
Excellent question, 34. I would like them to know that, I have my own podcast, and it has become a much larger part of my life than I initially thought it would be, in a really good way. I started it 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. One, because I'm a huge extrovert, and the lockdown was driving me crazy. I live alone. I have a dog, and he's great, but he's not much of a talker. And so I started the show that's interview-based, kind of like this one, because I just really needed to talk with people. And more specifically, I wanted to try and have the kinds of conversations around things like culture, society, politics, that I didn't really feel that I was having with my friends and my family, because I feel like a lot of the topics around, or a lot of the conversations around topics that are really important have gotten really binary and can turn toxic really quickly. And that's never really been my brand, so to speak. Like, I like, chopping it up and having nuanced conversations, complex conversations about complex topics. And so I kind of wanted to try to model that in the same way that you're modeling empathy and inquisitiveness in this podcast. I want to try and model empathy and curiosity and nuance in the topics that I care about. And it initially just really started as a lark. But over time, I found that I really liked podcasting and really like talking with people. I still think I'm a better host than a guest, so hopefully I'm going to do okay here, because I love prepping and I love researching and doing all the work so I can be the best host I can be and make every guest feel like they had just the best interview of their lives. At least that's the bar that I set for myself. I don't know how often I reach it, but I think you totally get what I'm saying. It's like you set as high a bar as possible and you try to hit it, and maybe you rarely do, but if you don't set the bar high, you're not even going to try to hit it. So that's what I aim to do with the podcast, and it's become a big part of my life and a really good creative outlet, and it's given me a lot of purpose that I didn't have before, and so I'm really grateful for that. I think a lot of who I am is wrapped up in that show. I think I am like my father in that I'm very curious. I love learning about a lot of different things. And I think I'm a very empathetic person. I think it helps me as a creative. It definitely helped me as a director working with other people. It's very hard for me not to see the world through other people's eyes. And it's very hard for me not to understand where other people are coming from. So if I were like an X-Men, it would probably be the lamest superpower, but I do feel like it's something that is I've really been blessed with over the course of my life. And I think it's probably why I'm in the field that I'm in, and why, for instance, I liked working with kids as much as I did, or I'm really a people person. And so, yeah, and it's also kind of why I was attracted to this show. It's like when you posted on Reddit and I listened to some of the episodes, I was really drawn in because I think you have a similar energy. And you seem like a naturally inquisitive and curious person. And I was also really drawn in by kind of the thesis of your show and how it relates to having a lack of relationship with your grandparents. I mean, for instance, I never got to meet my dad's parents. They both passed away before I was born. In fact, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this. Sorry, Pops, if I'm oversharing. But my mom and dad met. And then they got engaged 6 weeks after they met, which is insane. They are still together to this day. And they still are deeply in love with each other. They ran a business together. I mean, it's a model marriage in that respect. It's obviously not perfect. No marriage is. But they are a really good model of what a good marriage looks like. But in the 6 months between when they got engaged and when they got married, both my dad's parents passed away. And a whole other host of terrible things happened to him. So I'm actually really grateful for my mom entering his life at that moment, because he didn't know how dark it was going to get. Of course, she didn't either. But I'm really glad that they had each other. So I never got to know my dad's parents because they passed away before I was even a thought. And my mom's dad, my biological grandfather, passed away when I was only 5.5. So I have some very vibrant memories of him. But I never really got a chance to know him as a man and as a peer, rather than as my big gregarious grandfather on the East Coast who always bought me cool toys. So I'm blessed to still have my grandmother with me. She's 92 years old, and I actually just recorded an interview with her a couple weeks ago. So I'm really grateful for her, but I do wish that I could have gotten to know so many other relatives that I never really got a chance to connect with. So in that way, I really connect with the thesis of your show.
I appreciate that, man. I think you really, get the concept and, the whole purpose behind it. And yeah, man, I don't know if you feeling the energy, but I think we are really alike in a lot of aspects. We have our podcast, and it seems like we're extroverted people who, just want to connect with other folks on a deeper level. There's a lot of things I wish I could bring up with what you just said. I'm just going to try to go off with what I remember. I am not like yourself. You say you do the research. I'm kind of opposite in that way with my with my podcast. You reached out. I saw you had a podcast, but I didn't want to listen too much because I'm more interested in getting, to know you as a person, maybe even outside the podcast or with the podcast. Regardless, just you as who you are, as Michael Callahan. That's who I want to get to know. So for a lot of folks that come on or try to be guests, I don't do my research. I try to learn everything I need to know, during our conversation. And then as far as, what you're doing as far as empathy goes, like, I feel like it's a buzzword nowadays, but emotional intelligence seems to be a concept that, is entering into society's consciousness. Someone a previous guest had told me that it's like, you seem like you have pretty high emotional intelligence, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but maybe for yourself as well. It's I don't know. I like to, kind of just read energy or like read body language, read the tone or, eye contact, all these different things that I guess counts as emotional intelligence. But I guess for me, it always just feels like what I've been doing my whole life. And I don't know if you're familiar with the 9 types of geniuses. Like, everyone's a genius. We just have to figure out what kind we fall into. And interpersonal is one of those things. And I don't know if you've seen that before, but maybe it's worth taking a look at just for you and how you like to get to know people. It might be something interesting for yourself. But yeah, thank you for sharing too. Like, sorry, Pops, if that's a little too much, but I definitely feel you on that. I always, like, you put it in a good way where, you wish you could have experienced that with your grandparents, as far as like being a peer or being at a similar age where you're starting to understand versus, just being a little kid and you see these adults as like these giants pretty much. And so, I just want to say I hear you, and I think we relate on that level for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely feel like we are vibing in that way. I think we are connected in that way. And I think as far as what I mean by getting to know them as a peer, like I was having a conversation with my dad not so long ago. I can't remember if it was a few months or a couple years ago. It all kind of blurs together in my mind. We have so many conversations, but I was telling him about how when I was a kid, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to this, it's hard not to be self-centered when you're very young, and because you don't realize you are. It's just you don't understand what it means to be an adult, and you don't understand that when you're an adult, every choice you make requires sacrifice. Every single one, right? Like, I have a dog now. I don't have any kids, but I have a dog. He's 4 years old. I got him when he was 2 months old. And I knew I wanted a dog because I grew up with a dog, and I love dogs. They're kind of like me. I'm a big dog. I like meeting people. I'm high energy. I get excited about stuff. So me and a dog, we're like peas in a pod. And I got a dog, and I almost instantly understood that there were going to be sacrifices that I was going to have to make if I wanted to be a good dog owner. I'm not going to leave him home alone for more than 4 or 5 hours at a time, unless it's an absolute emergency, because I don't want to have him be lonely and develop anxiety. I have to make sure that he's well fed. I have to make sure that he's well trained and well behaved. And that requires sacrifice, because I have to put hours into that. Hours that I could be watching movies or going on dates or playing video games or doing whatever the hell I want to do. Every single decision that you make is a sacrifice because something else could have been there rather than the thing you're doing. And I realized over time that I didn't mind making the sacrifice because I love my dog and he gives me so much joy, but still I'm making a choice to sacrifice something that might bring me more pleasure in the short term in exchange for something that brings me much more joy and inner reward in the long term. And once I began to realize that with dog ownership, but also other things, as you get older, you understand that time is a valuable resource and everything that you do requires spending it somewhere. But as a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, when time feels like a limitless commodity and summers last forever, I didn't really understand that to be good parents, my parents had to make so many sacrifices, and they had to sacrifice their immediate needs and gratification in order to make my childhood good. Like being there for my baseball games, being there for my theater rehearsals, being there to do homework with me, being there for vacations. all the things that made them fantastic parents, I took for granted because I had no context really as to what other kids and their parents were going through. I think a lot of people probably understand this. It's like whether you come from a wealthy background, a middle class background, a poor background, working class, whatever it is, until you start to see the larger world, I think most of us kind of think that everyone else kind of lives our lives, unless you have a ton of exposure to people that are outside of your socioeconomic sphere. And it wasn't until I got to college, really, or later in high school and college, and really started to have deep conversations with other people about their childhood experiences, that I really began to understand and value all the things my parents did for me. And then as I got older than that, and I had to start making hard choices about, oh man, it would be really great to just stay home and, have a beer or something, but I really should be doing this other thing that's more responsible. I began to understand that everything my parents did, even though they did it out of love, also required so much sacrifice that they could have put anywhere else towards a fun project they wanted to do, or watching TV all night, or whatever you could paint the wall with any number of things that they wanted to do rather than help their sometimes annoying 6-year-old son with his math homework because he sucked at math, right? And as a peer, I'm able to understand all those sacrifices my mother and father made, and I'm able to thank them for it as an adult. It's one thing as a kid to thank your dad or thank your mom for doing something, even if that thank you is genuine. Every time I thanked my parents as a kid, I was genuine. But it's a thank you that is a little bit hollow because it doesn't carry the weight of understanding the actual sacrifice inherent in that job my parents did. But as a man in my 30s, I get it. And now I can tell my dad face to face, man to man, or my mom, man to woman, thank you for doing what you did, because now I fully understand everything you had to do to give me a good childhood. And I never had the opportunity, unfortunately, to say that to my grandparents or to my grandfather, who passed away before I was 6. And so I do regret that, but I'm so grateful to have the parents I have and the grandmother that I have and tell them that to their face while I still have time.
For sure, man. As far as appreciating our parents, I am there with you. I am an only child, and I still stay with my parents. And I think, aside from, not being financially be able to live by myself at the moment, I think a big part of me sticking around, because, I could scrape around, I could get my own place and do all that. But being an only child, and, I'm going to overshare something about my parents as well right now. I had a sister who passed away when I was 8, when she was 8. I was unborn. But I think that experience for my parents definitely shifted, how they would raise their next child, right? So from there, they were living in the Philippines when it happened. So they moved to America afterwards because healthcare, that was the biggest issue, is that they couldn't get the healthcare in the Philippines to save her. So moving to America and raising me, I'll be honest, I was pretty sheltered. They were really on me about, being safe and don't risk anything, and, just stay to yourself, don't push any buttons, do all that stuff. And I feel like they've sacrificed a lot. Even just speaking with my mom recently, I had her on the podcast as well, one of my first few episodes. Of course, my parents would be one of my first few episodes, but she, I found out she only slept 3 hours a night back at that time when I was a kid, and I had no idea. I thought, because I got my 8 hours of sleep every night, that they both were getting that as well, which was totally untrue. My dad had his own, life experience going on at that time as well, where even though he had his own substance issues, and he used that, I think, as a way to kind of, at that point in his life, in his 30s, losing a child, trying to make things work here in America, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure under him as well, coming from a person where his father had died when he was the age of 2. And I think he struggled a lot with having a positive male role model, and just learning how to be a good dad and how to be a good father, how to be a good man. And So now that as an adult and being able to look back on it, being able to talk to them about these things, has given me a lot more appreciation. I see my parents as the people they are, and I feel like they still have some kind of regret, something that they hold on to. And I try to tell them, I definitely understand, whether or not you feel like you made the right decisions at the time, or I know that you were thinking that you were doing the best you could with what you got and the information that you had. And so I stay with them. I'm still here, making sure that I'm able to see them every day. I can see them every day, and they can see me every day. At some point, and I think, for my mom, she loves it. but for me, there is that point where I'm feeling like maybe I need to be doing my own thing out there in the world, but can I really leave them? And, I'm justifying my actions by telling myself that this is the way I'm repaying them for all the sacrifices they've made in my life. Maybe I should be doing something similar, But yeah, that's what I just want to say about that.
Oh, that's great, man. And I think as we age and get to know our parents better and get to know them as peers, and by peers, I just mean as fellow adults, we understand their flaws better. And I think knowing our parents' flaws and knowing that they're imperfect human beings like we all are, at least for me, it gives me a greater appreciation for the wonderful things they've done for me. Because when you see them as a child, if you're anything like I was, when you see them as a child, it's like just your hero, just this, perfect being who has everything under control and can, makes few, if any, mistakes. Once you get to know them as an adult and also realize that pretty much every adult, is kind of always flying by the seat of their pants. We're all just trying to do the best we can. Once you realize that, it just, it really puts into perspective how much they got right, even though they were really just figuring it out as they went.
For sure. And I think that kind of plays into, anyone out there who maybe feel like they're struggling or they don't know what they're doing. I feel like this was one of those universal experiences that we all kind of go through as we get older. Maybe it's the maturity, or just having more experience gives us that insight. But yeah, I think. Sorry. Oh, my bad, man. I lost my train of thought. But what was the last part you were saying?
About how once we understand our parents' flaws, we can have a better appreciation for them.
Yes, yeah. And for us to start with our parents and almost using that understanding to almost, see everyone else in that kind of same lens, I think it helps us connect with people or build that empathy. And I don't know, for you, did you ever feel like growing up you were able to talk to people who are older and kind of like get knowledge from them or get their stories, or was that just me?
It depends on the age. I always liked talking with people, and I do remember stories that I was told by people who were older than me that stayed with me. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. For me, like without my grandparents or without those older folks I was able to connect to, it almost seemed like at a certain age, I think around 12 or 13 for me, like I would just talk to adults or like try to find out find out more about them, find out their stories. I would share. I remember one adult in particular was like my bus driver, that in the public bus, but they ran the same route, so I'd see them every morning going to school. And one day out of the blue, I was like, can you read my poetry or my songs and tell me what you think of them? And I think that took them totally off guard. It's like, I see this kid like every day, but we never talk, and all of a sudden he's asking me to check out his poetry. But yeah, for me, it was like that. It kind of manifested in that way where it was like, okay, I see somebody that I see every day. Let me, try to connect in some way. And I think for me, that came because I didn't have that connection with my grandparents, almost. Because if I did, maybe those were the people that I would go to, at least the older people that I would go to connect with.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think everything we do is informed by the things that happened either before we arrived or the things that happened to us as we're children. And again, the older that I got, the more I understood that a lot of the ways that my parents raised me was a direct result of what happened with their parents raising them. And I imagine similarly to, because of the tragic passing of your sister, I imagine it had a big impact, as you said, on how your parents raised you, probably more cautiously. They were more concerned with your well-being because, of course, they don't want to lose a second child. Similarly, my father grew up with 4 brothers, and his mom and dad moved the family around a lot because his dad was always switching jobs. And I didn't realize how big of an impact that had on how he raised me and my sister. And it was only once I was in my 20s when, because my dad was oftentimes, before he started his own business with my mom when I was about 16, he often seemed unhappy at work. And I always wondered, my dad was a super talented guy, a great people person, just super outgoing, a great manager, so many fantastic qualities. And I always wondered, why, even as a kid, why is he staying around when he could be just working anywhere else and just be doing gangbusters? He'd be doing great. And he never really gave me a straight answer as a kid, but it wasn't until I was about 22, 23, we went out to dinner and I asked him again, because by this point he owned his own business and was really thriving. And I asked my dad, I was like, I know you weren't ready to start your business until, everything was financially straight and you guys felt secure enough to take that risk. But before that, why didn't you, take another job? And he told me, point blank, he said, son, I did get offers. I got an offer that would have doubled my salary. And I thought about taking it, but it would have required us moving a few hours away. And I didn't want you to experience the childhood that I had, because I never got to make good childhood friends. Because every single time I got to make friends, 1 or 2 years later, I'd have to move to another school because my dad lost his job or he quit his job and we'd be moving to another town. And I always wished as a kid that I had really best friends, and I never had that, not once. And so I wanted to make sure that you and your sister had the experience that I never got to have. And so while I oftentimes thought about taking other jobs, I knew that I never would, because your happiness and giving you the childhood that I wanted was more important to me than taking some job that I might have been a little happier with. And again, it all speaks back to what I was saying earlier of like truly understanding the sacrifices your parents make for you, and also understanding why they do it. Because I think so much of what we do, whether or not we're parents, just as people, is reactionary. Whether we know it or not, we're reacting to trauma, we're reacting to reward, we're reacting to all kinds of things that are happening to us either years ago, yesterday, right now. We're hyper social animals, and we are reactionary to the things that happen to us, traumatic or happy or whatever it is. And so, yeah, man, I get it.
I feel you, man. And thank you again for sharing. And shout out to Pops, man. That is that I can imagine for him. Like, I hope he feels like he was successful in doing that. That he feels content, that he was able to kind of give you the life that he didn't have as a kid. And I don't know for you, but like I don't want to put that pressure on you and say, talk about kids. But as far as, maybe if you did, is there a way that you would kind of, what would you want for your kid that you feel like you didn't get, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't mind you asking at all. Questions was in the title of the podcast, and I'm happy to answer.
For sure.
What would I give my kids that I didn't have? That is a great question. I'm not sure. Because I had so much, I had parents who loved me. I had parents who supported me in my endeavors.
For sure. And
I'm struggling to answer. I want to give you an answer. I know the things that I want to give my kids, but my hypothetical one day future kids, but I don't know if there's anything that was lacking. I'm sure I would do things slightly differently, like things here and there, but I can't think of a big thing that I would give them that my parents didn't give me.
For sure, man. And I think if your parents hear that, it would just warm their hearts, might make them tear up a little bit. But I got you. And maybe, it's something we won't know until we get to that point, right? So who knows? We things can come up, situations can come up, and you might be inspired, maybe depending on how your kid is, you'd be like, oh wait, this is different, But yeah, no, I hear you, man. It's hard to think about it when that moment hasn't come up just yet. Just a heads up, man. We have about 15 minutes left in our conversation tonight, but don't feel bad or nothing. I honestly like it when the conversation kind of just flows the way it has for us. And you're always welcome to come back for a second episode if you really want to go through the gauntlet. But I think for tonight, we're just gonna have to get through the warm-up, if that's okay with you.
Fine by me, man. It's your show. Run it however you'd like. I'm just happy to be involved.
All right, man. Well, my second question for you in the warm-up is, if there was an act I could do to express the energy you possess, what could I do? In other words, how would you like to be honored?
That's a great question. I would want you to honor me, be like some kind of deity. Honor me by erecting 30 statues that look exactly like me. No, what would I have you do? Well, I think in the spirit of curiosity and empathy, I would want you to, every day for 30 days, try and talk to a stranger and get to know them on a personal level in the time that you have with them. Doesn't have to be a super long conversation. Obviously, people have limited time. Who knows, that stranger you're talking to might be going off to do something important and doesn't have a lot of time. But I think it's because I'm endlessly curious about other people. I think that everyone I come across has something to teach me. And I think that every human being is fundamentally valuable in some way, right? We're not all valuable in the same way, but I think that everyone has something to offer and everyone has something to share. And some of the best experiences and best memories I've ever had have been from complete happenstance coming across complete strangers. I'll give one example. I went to Spain in 2015 because I had to go to Europe for work for 2 weeks. And then after I finished work, I decided to travel around for a little bit. And I went to 2 countries after my work was done. I went to Spain and then I went to Ireland. I was in Spain for a week and I was in Barcelona for several days. And I wanted to go to this restaurant that Anthony Bourdain had recommended going to because I was a big fan of his show. And I got on the train to go to the coast from Barcelona, but my Spanish had mostly left me since I learned it in college because this was about 10, 13 years later. And all I could remember was the Pledge of Allegiance in Spanish, and all my other Spanish had left me. And also the Spanish in Spain, and especially in Barcelona, where Spanish is not really the main language there. They don't even call it Spanish in that region in Catalonia. They call it Castilian, and they call the language they speak Catalan. Probably butchering the pronunciation there. Catalan is it's like if Spanish and French had a baby. Like if you look at the language written out, it literally looks like those two languages were smashed together. So even the Spanish that I was hearing was said in such a different way that I could barely even process it, even if I would have understood it if someone with, let's say, like a Mexican background were speaking Spanish. That was this kind of Spanish that I was used to. So I got on this train and I thought I was going to the coast, but in fact, I was going inland, and I didn't realize my mistake until maybe an hour into the train ride. So I get off the train. I end up in this tiny little town that wasn't anywhere near where I wanted or needed to be, but I was starving. So I was like, all right, I just got to make the best of it. I look up like the nearest well-reviewed restaurant in this tiny little village of a couple thousand people on TripAdvisor, and I walk over there. And it was only open till about, I think, 4 p.m. It was like 2:30 when I got there. So I sit down. They had this like 3-course meal. Everything in Spain is so cheap compared to almost anywhere else in Europe, and especially America. To give you context, 2015 was a 3-course meal. It was that also came with a full bottle of wine, like not just a glass, a full bottle of wine, and also a full bottle of sparkling water. It's this special kind of sparkling water that had a little bit of sugar in it, because how they like to drink wine over there, if they're not drinking it straight, is basically red wine in a glass with ice cubes, and then some of that seltzer, that sweetened seltzer water, or sparkling water, and it was delicious. It was like a poor man's sangria, sort of. Absolutely delicious. So, full bottle of wine, full bottle of sparkling water, 3-course meal, 15 euros, which is at the time maybe 17, 18 American dollars. It was almost even. And it was some of the best food I'd ever had.
Damn.
And the server comes over, right? No, it's fine. You should react that way. I reacted that way when I got my first course. I was like, damn, okay. I didn't know I was going to get this much great food for this price. So this woman comes over, the server, and initially I thought she was a server. But it turns out she was one of the co-owners. Her and her husband owned this restaurant together. She was originally from Bolivia. Her husband grew up in the Catalonian district. He was a Catalan. And he didn't speak really any English at all, except for a few words, which I was going to learn in a bit. But her English was actually quite good. They had met some years ago when she moved to Spain from Bolivia and had been married for several years and ran this restaurant together. And we got to talking, and she asked where I was from and how I got to their little village and how I got lost. And, they were closing at 4. And then right before they closed, she came over to me and she was like, hey, we know you're here alone. And we thought, would you like to hang out with us after we close the restaurant? We have like a little bit of work to do, but then we could open up a bottle of wine and have some bread and just talk. And I said, I love that. Yeah, I have nothing else to do here because I didn't intend to come here. So I'd love to chat with you and your husband. So the restaurant closes at 4. We go to the back of the restaurant. They open up a bottle of wine. We ended up having a couple of them and just like bread and cheese. And the only English that her husband knew was Game of Thrones references. So he, like, anytime I could reference Game of Thrones, which was like one of his favorite shows, he would like absolutely light up and totally understood me. But other than that, like, she had to translate my English into Catalan, and we kind of, made it work. But we ended up talking for almost 5 hours, from about 4 until 9 p.m. And the only reason that I left at 9 was because I think the last train out was like at 9:30 and I had to walk to the station. But I had such an amazing time. I got to understand them and why they started their restaurant and their marriage. And they were just full of so much life and happiness and joy. And the food was amazing. And I made this amazing, wonderful connection with total strangers because of an accident, because I couldn't understand the Spanish on the train that I was taking and I went the wrong way. And I have so many other stories just like that from either my trip to Europe. I have a similar story at an Indian restaurant in Ireland where after the restaurant closed, I shut the place down with one of the servers. And the restaurant was run by all Bangladeshis. And the only reason they started an Indian restaurant because they were afraid that the Irish wouldn't understand what Bangladeshi food was. And I just made all these wonderful connections while I was traveling just because I took the risk of talking to people I didn't know. And I love doing that because people are so full of humanity and kindness and grace and generosity and empathy and interesting stories and brilliant backgrounds. And it's one of my favorite things about life is getting to meet and know other people. And hopefully they get to know me. And so, long-winded way of saying this, 34, but if you're going to honor me, I would just hope that you would do that, because I think that not only would it be flattering for me for you to do that in my honor, quote unquote, but also I think everyone should try and take that risk, because there's a lot of really wonderful, amazing people out there who you'll never get the chance to meet if you don't meet them.
For sure, man. And we got you. Now that we know, we'll definitely take the 30-day challenge of talking to new people. But that's a wild story, man. It sounds like you got plenty more stories just like it. Now I guess, that kind of inspires me. I haven't traveled, I don't think, enough in my life to be able to talk to folks and have these. I don't think I've had that kind of experience. But a question came up for me was, do you feel like, you have your podcast to have the conversations that you want, and like myself, I have this podcast to do the same. As far as talking to people outside of your podcast, do you feel like it's pretty easy to create those same conversations outside versus, you had to create a platform just to have those conversations? Because I think that's, for me, that's a big reason why I also started the podcast, is that I was the kind of person to always want to, dig deeper. And out there in my regular life, I don't think a lot of people like doing that or they don't want to, or they have some kind of wall, that they put up. So, creating my platform, I'm able to invite people on for them to know exactly what's going to happen, and they're more comfortable since, you know, it's like a thing that's set in their mind. So for you, the conversations that you want to have or you're looking to have, are you able to have that, you know, just out there in the regular world as well? And in America, I guess, because I feel like internationally, people are more open just because, oh, this is a different person, they're not from here, let's get to know each other. But yeah, would you say just in LA? I know LA is one of those places that I think maybe get a bad rap. I don't know if that's something that you feel like is a judgment of living in LA, but everyone's so busy, everyone's so focused on doing their own thing that you can't connect in a meaningful way on the street or, you know, at the bus or wherever you meet them.
That's a great question. I think I'll answer the multiple parts of it kind of one by one. So comparing the podcast that I do, and by the way, if anyone's interested, not to gratuitously plug, but it's called Where We Go Next. And that show, it's a very specific kind of conversation because I usually bring on someone who's an expert in their field or someone with a specific area of knowledge. And then I do a really deep dive on that particular topic and talk about it with them because they know the most about that thing. So as an example, episode 60, I brought on a journalist and author by the name of Steve Hendricks, who wrote this book on the history and science of fasting across every civilization, and also the history of fasting in the United States and how it came to be popularized in the 19th century, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually one of his essays 10 years ago that inspired me to start fasting. So being able to bring him on to talk about his new book and really do a deep dive into like, wow, what's the history of fasting in India? What's the history of fasting in the Jewish religion? When did Christians start fasting? When did Americans start fasting and why? Like, what are the scientific benefits? Like this deep dive with him, right? That's kind of what the podcast is about. When I get to meet and talk to strangers, it's an entirely different dynamic for me because I meet them where they are. So if I'm talking with someone, and I feel like, you know, if anyone's looking to do this in their life, where I would recommend doing it is places that you go a lot. There was this concept I first came across when I was a Starbucks barista when I was 18. Everyone has a first place, a second place, and a third place. First place is your home. Second place is your work. Your third place is your place that isn't home or work that you love going often. Starbucks, of course, wanted to be everyone's third place. But your place as a listener probably isn't Starbucks, but you can probably think of it in your mind. Maybe it's a neighborhood bar, maybe it's the library, maybe it's a cafe you go to all the time. And that's where I try to do in LA a lot of that work of meeting new people and making long friendships or relationships with people, whether it's the bartender, the person behind the counter, the barista, a server, etc. If you put in the work over time, people let their guard down, but it's important to meet them where they are. So I'm not going to ask them the same questions I'd ask an expert on fasting or a stand-up comedian, because maybe they don't know anything about that. But people know a lot about their own lives. So if I notice that someone's really into sports, even though I don't know much about sports at all, I'll try to engage with them there. You know, wow, when did you first get interested in baseball? Like what first sparked your interest in getting, on the baseball team when you were 12? Or if someone's really into painting, I don't know a lot about painting, but like, what kind of materials do you use? Do you use oil? Do you use acrylic? Like, who's your favorite painter, right? And I found over time that when people understand that you're genuinely interested in their knowledge and what they have to say in their voice, they are more than willing to share with you, because people being interested in you is deeply flattering. And when people understand that you're not trying to get anything from them, you just want to learn from them, people open up like a blooming flower. And so that's what I just do. I try to approach them with openness and no ego. And I try to meet them where they are and hear what they have to share with me. But I think it's easiest to do that, easier than a bus stop, let's say, unless you've got a lot of time at that bus stop. Do it somewhere, do it at your third place. Do it somewhere where you go often, where you can make those long bonds, because it's not going to happen immediately. Like the first interaction you have with the barista, maybe you just, get to know who she is, get to know her name, say a couple things. And then maybe the next time you bring up, oh, you mentioned your dog. You just got a new golden retriever. How's Barry, or whatever the dog's name is, right? Then she's like, oh, wow, Michael remembered that I have a golden retriever named Barry. No other customer has asked me about him before. That's really cool. And then slowly but surely you build a bond. like you build any bond with anyone. But I think that's, having worked in the service industry a lot, that's something I really try and practice is like, I think people, whether they know it or not, often treat people in the service industry just as like widgets. Like you're just the person who brings me the thing I need. Like it's just transactional. You're getting me a coffee. That's all I want from you. I'll say the minimum amount of words and I'm gone, right? And having been on the opposite end of those transactions, it can be really dehumanizing because you don't feel like a human being. You feel like a robot who just makes coffee. And so for me, I always, even if it's just small, even if I'm never going to see that person again, I always try and interact with them in a way where it's like, I see you. I get that you're wearing an apron. I get that this is your job, but you're a person. You're not just someone who's making me a latte. And I think that just leading with that, if it's a place you go often, just leading with that attitude, people open up.
For sure. I think, yeah, that experience you've had on the other end is bringing something very valuable to a lot of folks, man. I don't think, when I'm thinking about my experience, I don't think I've ever felt jaded in that way, where I never felt human, or I started not feeling human in a service job. In my mind, I guess it was always in the lens of like, still trying to make, even if a person looked at me as a widget, in my mind, it never even crossed my mind. It was more like, okay, what am I going to be doing with this person from my side? But yeah, I can see how a lot of people can feel that way. But I think I have to ask you just one more question before we finish off today's interview.
Hit me.
Also, well, my first one is, would you be down to come back for a second episode at some point?
Yeah, man, I'd love to. I'm excited to answer all those great questions that you usually ask, but I'm very grateful to have the conversation that we had. I don't have any regrets about the things we talked about, but I would love to come back.
Absolutely, man, for sure, and we'll make it happen. But let me finish it off with my last question of the warm-up, which is, on a scale from 1 to 10. Oh man, I keep missing. See, I'm trying to figure out this new flow. But on a scale from 1 to 10, how well do you know yourself?
I know myself a lot better today than I did even 5 years ago, because of the things that happened to me over the last 10 years. I've struggled a lot with depression ever since my early 20s, and I had a really, really bad run of depression from about 2013 till about 2018 or so. Medication helped. I did Lexapro, which was very effective. Sorry. I think my Amazon Echo thought I was saying hold on one sec.
You got it.
Sorry about that. I said Lexapro, and the Amazon Echo thought I said something else. But anyway, so that medication helped a lot, and I'll get into that in just a second. But also, cognitive behavioral therapy really helped a lot. And if you're unfamiliar with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, what it requires is it's a lot of worksheets, but they're worksheets that are centered around interrogating your own thoughts and understanding if the thoughts that you're having are helpful or not. And also understanding that the thoughts that you have are not you, not always you anyway. And that's like something that was quite difficult to grasp at first, right? But if you suffer from anxiety or depression or another mental condition that involves your thoughts betraying you, or your thoughts telling you things that really aren't real, the thoughts inside your head can really feel like you. If your thoughts are saying you're worthless, you're nothing, no one likes you, right? Why would you think that those very thoughts actually aren't really you? They're coming from, the call's coming from inside the house.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things that I learned from cognitive behavioral therapy was understanding that sometimes your thoughts aren't you. They're lies. They're an invasive species. They're weeds. They're growing in the garden, but they're not the garden, right? And understanding that helped me to better understand who I truly was, and helped separate the bad thoughts, the lies, the weeds from the garden, from the flowers, from the things that were actually me. And then a few months ago, I had my first experience with psilocybin, otherwise known as magic mushrooms, right? And I'd been putting off for many years because I was fearful of it. I wasn't, I don't really have much experience with drugs outside of marijuana, but it is California after all. But I'm so glad that I had that experience because it wasn't a super intense one. I didn't have what I was expecting to have. I didn't have any kind of psychedelic trip. I didn't, ride a magic dragon on a rainbow. I really felt more than anything an overwhelming sense of calm and joy and gratitude. And I put on some headphones and I went for a walk in my neighborhood on the east side of Los Angeles in a neighborhood called Silver Lake. And I listened to the Beatles and I just walked around and I looked at people and I talked with people. And it was just this really great experience. And, but not at all what I was expecting. But it was what happened after that in the days that followed that experience that made me realize that, and I don't toss this word around lightly, I was cured. The way that Lexapro worked, it was like if my depression was a volume knob, it took the volume from a 10 to a 3, right? And I think people who've had antidepressants can understand this. It mutes a lot of the worst things about depression, but it doesn't make it go away. But after I had that experience with psilocybin, I realized a few days later, well, these things that are usually worrying me or making me anxious or depressed or sad, they're just not anymore. So I started to look at the studies. I'm like, why have all these things that I've been carrying around for so long, why are they suddenly not bothering me anymore? And I looked at a study out of UCSF where they took people who suffered from depression and they scanned their brains and then they gave them psilocybin and then they scanned them again a couple days later. And the brain scans look like heat maps. So the heat maps are like areas of activity in the brain, right? And you can do this to non-depressive people as well and see that same level of activity. And they scanned it before and after. And in the before scans, there were areas of activity in the brain like there are in every brain. And then there were also black parts, similar with every brain. Not every part of our brain is active all the time. And then they scanned them after that experience, a few days after, not while they were tripping, but a few days after. And they noticed a lot of the areas that were previously black were now lit up. And so after more research and studying what they think happens in people with depression when they experience the effects of psilocybin is the brain forms new pathways, right? It's like if city had, let's say, 10 intercrossing roads and 3 highways, all of a sudden got 100 more roads and 10 more highways. So you have all these new ways to travel the city, right? So if you were stuck in a traffic jam going down 6th Street, you were just stuck for hours and you're like, God, I really want to get off this street. And then all of a sudden, magically, like a genie made it appear, you have 3 more roads that now allow you to go around and get to your destination. And that's what it felt like. The things that I'd been bumping my head up against, the things that were making me depressed, sad, anxious, worried, regretful, all of a sudden, and again, this sounds crazy, they just didn't bother me anymore. And and over the last few months, this was like 4 months ago, I've really started to feel like myself in a genuine way that I didn't feel like for almost 10 years. And I feel so much more in touch with the person that I used to be and the person that I knew for so long, who kind of disappeared for 7 or 8 years. And so to get back to your question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do I know myself? I would say I know myself at a 10 because I know who I was before depression. I know who I was during depression, and I know who I am after. And those are 3 different people because I'll never be the person I was before I had that episode, but I know I'm not going to be the person I was when I had that episode. I'm an integrated person who experienced both the before, the during, and the after. And I'm grateful for the experience because I think it made me a better human being, but I'm also very grateful to be past it. And I'm so grateful for the life that I have and that I'm able to talk with people like you and meet so many interesting people and have friends and family who love me. And I'm also just really glad that for the first time in many, many years, I actually love myself.
That's huge, man. And I'm very happy that you've gotten to a place where you can say that and really feel it. And I will also say that I had a similar experience with shrooms as well.
Really?
My dark ages were a a little bit younger. You said yours was in your 20s. I think my dark ages were, sometimes I don't know what teenage angst is, or like, how much to attribute that to, but definitely from the ages 12 to 18, it was one of those moments for myself where, I'd cry myself to sleep every night. It was that's just who I was, and I think I hit it pretty well. I don't think nobody really was concerned about that part of myself. And then it wasn't until college, experimenting with different things, and I tried shrooms. My experience on shrooms have mostly, I would say 99% been positive. I had one time where I had a bad trip, but I was really looking for a bad trip at that time. But yes, in a similar vein, like this feeling of everything I was worried about, like the thing, even to this day, I was feeling, why am I worrying about it? I feel so small in this big, forever expanding universe that like something that I'm worried about right now, I'm pretty sure isn't really gonna, matter, in the grand scheme of things. And I think that keeps me feeling like it's okay. It's okay if some days I don't have a good day. Maybe I'm not, doing the best all the time. But I know in my mind I'm trying, and that whole focus of like being a part of this bigger thing, which I think hasn't, influenced me in trying to connect with people, or just staying focused on those little interactions I have with people. I think that also can be attributed to that experience. Is that, I don't know if you felt that way, but for me, it just, I felt like I was being embraced by Earth, like the sun was just hidden different, and yeah, even conversations with people. I don't know if you did it, only have done it solo, but if you're having that experience with a few other friends, the connectiveness is super heightened. It almost feels like telepathy at times, where me and a friend would look at something and we'll look at each other and like, we're thinking the same exact thing, aren't we? But yeah, so that's just, we could definitely dive into those experiences at a later date. But I did want to just say, anyone who has been struggling with, self-esteem or depression, maybe microdose, see how it goes. I don't know if for you, Mike, if you had microdose. For me, I was in college, so it wasn't really microdosing back then. But yeah, the experience has definitely taken a weight off my back and has given me a new focus. I will say, however, that I think there's still like some kind of underlying depression for myself that I continue to hold, and there's a lot more to unpack with that, and I don't think we got the time for tonight. But feel free to ask me that question the next time you come back on 34 Questions, man.
Absolutely, will do. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely, man, for sure. I gotta be open about these things. The more you hold it in, and honestly, the podcast is where I'm comfortable talking about these things as well. Yeah, I don't think you'll really catch me talking about this out there in public, but for the folks out there who know me, tune into the podcast to really get my thoughts. But yeah, for you, man, we are at that point. Just wanted to ask you if you had any last things you'd like to add before we head out of here.
I'm really grateful for you having me on, and I think you're doing something really special with the podcast. And I love the energy, and I just love the whole thesis of the show. And so I'm really glad you're doing it. I look forward to coming back, and I hope you have 1,000 more episodes, man.
I appreciate it, man. The goal is 10,000, right?
Okay. Well, I didn't mean to shoot you short there. 10,000.
No.
Let's do 100,000.
I mean, maybe this is just for me to just get it out there and speak it into existence one day. But the whole idea, hopefully one day, is that I have multiple people doing 34 questions, in different languages, and having these conversations with people in other countries, because I'm very limited to just America and speaking in English. But as far as getting to know everybody in the world, I think I'm gonna need more folks who can speak those languages. But that's the goal, man, is to keep this thing pushing, and have it be that collection of just society that the future can be like, damn, these were the people back in the day, and I wish we could have that. But one, thank you again, Mike, for stopping by. Definitely enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to our part 2. I'll try to be a little more prepared. I'll listen to some of your episodes and try to pick out little things that stick out to me so I can ask you about them then. But yeah.
Well, thank you, man. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think we got 30 questions to go. So yeah. I will try to be less long-winded next time.
No, absolutely don't do that, man. I want you to just be yourself, whatever comes to mind. That's what this is all about. So thank you, Mike. And for the folks out there who tuned in, if you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're checking this out, I want to thank you for your time as well. So remember to reach out, reach forward. As always, much love. And we'll catch you guys next time with 34 Questions. Peace. And it fades out from there, Mike.